54 years ago, I entered a classroom as a kindergartner for the first time. And very much like I'm feeling today, I was uncomfortable in the setting I was in. But here I am, both a traditional high school biology teacher and the Superior School Forest Coordinator. I'm going to ask you to picture a typical classroom, and I'm going to ask you what you see. For many, it includes desks, textbooks, a whiteboard. You probably see a teacher sitting someplace in the room or out in the hallway greeting the students as they come in. But I'll tell you what, the classroom I'm imagining doesn't look anything like that. My classroom is filled with birds and the sound of wind in the trees, not bells. My lessons are coming from the stories my dad is sharing with me about the plants and animals that we're looking at while we're walking through the woods. No textbooks. My classroom smells like the damp earth of the early morning and the smell of decaying leaves in the fall. And when I picture my favorite teacher, it is my dad. I clearly remember one afternoon when we were standing on the edge between a large field and a forest. And knowing my dad, he was probably scouting for some new hunting location. And as always, there I was tagging along behind him. But I remember him looking at me and saying in the way he always did, he'd kind of bring me close over by him and he'd say, "Come here, I want you to look around. Do you notice how different these two areas are?" And then he told me in nature, we will see where two different habitats meet. And it's there that we always see the greatest amount of life. And he told me these are the most interesting places in the woods. So it took me until about my third year of college before I realized that he was describing a really well-known ecological principle known as the edge effect. But more importantly, he was teaching me a metaphor about our society. So you see, in my dad's classroom, he taught lessons about nature, and most importantly, at the same time, his lessons about nature helped me better understand myself and who I was. So when at the age of 5, I entered my first real classroom, I did not like it. The lessons in the school classroom, I realize now were needed, and they're essential to me becoming a successful person like they are for everybody. But they were taught in a way that was very foreign to me. And yet, I come to you today as a teacher. I realized in my 30 years as an educator that we have to continue to find new approaches to connect with our students because our students continue to evolve. And yet many people in society expect us as teachers to teach in exactly the same way that they were taught when they were young. I bought into that same mindset of teaching until I met a student named Jessica. Jessica was transferred into my 8th grade classroom midway through the school year. She was a 7th grader at that time. She was academically gifted and she knew exactly how to play that part of a really good student. She was pretty much a genius, but the real issue was that she was struggling emotionally and she was not fitting in well with her peers socially. So here I was, a fairly new teacher. And by that time I had gained a reputation as one of those teachers who made pretty good connections with students, and especially with the students who were struggling academically, or some of them behaviorally, some of them who were having trouble socially. But at that time as a teacher, I was focused on presenting information and I was focused on giving content to my students. I loved to share what I knew, and I wanted to pass that love of what I knew along to my students. I was anxious to meet Jessica, and I was pretty confident that I would and could make a connection with her and that she'd find success, but probably even more importantly to me was I wanted her to find happiness in my classroom. But let me tell you, that is not what happened. She remained distant, very distant, and no matter what I did to build a community with her and a relationship with her and to build community within her and the other students, she continued to remain a loner. I could see she was unhappy. Some days this unhappiness looked like anger. Some days it looked like arrogance. Some days it looked indifference. but almost every day, that unhappiness looked like an attitude that simply said, leave me alone. Like most teachers, we have students who keep us up at night, and Jessica was that student for me. Thinking back on it now, I was naive. I was kind of focused on myself and what I could do for Jessica and what role I was playing instead of looking at Jessica. But years later, I received a text from Jesse, and he said that the greatest thing I had taught him in that classroom was how to truly see himself. And that's when it clicked with me. See, our traditional vision of teaching content isn't the most important aspect of education. In addition to that content, we need to use the content to help our students discover insights about themselves. It seemed like I was only giving my students half the education that they deserved at that time. So that's when I started to use who I was and what I really knew, which was nature, to reach all of the students in my classroom. Let me tell you another story. When my daughter, our first child, was born, my husband and I couldn't wait to raise her in the outdoors. Not literally. It was important to me, though, that she learned the same lessons that my dad had taught me. We wanted her to develop a love of the outdoors. So one day when my daughter was just a few weeks old, it was an early spring day, my husband and I took her outside, and we wanted her to feel that fresh grass on her bare little toes and feet for the first time. And I can clearly remember my husband holding my daughter up under her arms, and he slowly started to lower her to the ground until her feet hit the grass. And as soon as her feet hit the grass, as we're watching, we were totally surprised because she yanked her legs and knees up to her chest, and her eyes flew wide open, and she started crying. And we were caught off guard. We didn't know why she did that, what was happening, but I think we expected her to be all happy. We did not expect that reaction, and we kind of laughed. But now when I look back, what that experience taught me is that children need to be exposed to the outdoors gently. So if we as teachers and adults believe this is essential for our students, we need to remember that outdoor education doesn't have to be all outdoors all the time. See, nature is our greatest storyteller. Through her stories, I teach my students to see each other, but more importantly, to see themselves in a much deeper way. And hopefully that's the goal of every educator and the goal of our education system. Through making connections while using Mother Nature, our students can start to handle critters, and by that they gain empathy. They smell the scents of the earth, they can hear the sounds of nature and conversation. They get hot outside, they get cold, they get wet, they get dry. They make connections to what they learn in the regular classrooms, and it's the best of both worlds coming together to enrich their daily lives. Thank you for listening.